All right, we're reading the Saga of Gösta Berling by Selma Lagerlöf. And now we've come to chapter 9, which is called The Auction at Björne. And Björne, is the name of a farm, apparently, and or a house, a place. And they had an auction there. It also means bear, the Björne, bear. Yeah. We young ones often had to wonder at the old people's stories. So, was there a ball every day throughout your radiant youth? We asked them. Was life just one long fairy tale back then? Were all the young ladies lovely and charming at that time? And did every banquet end with Gösta Berling running off with one of them? Then the old people would shake their venerable heads and go on to tell about the whirring of spinning wheels and the rustling of the loom, about kitchen utensils, about the thumping of the flail and the rhythm of the axe in the forest. But it didn't take long before they were back on the old pathways. Then sleighs drove up to the entry stairs. Then horses hurried away through dark forests with merry young people. Then the dance whirled and the fiddle strings snapped. With thunderous crashing, the wild pursuit of adventure surged round Löwen's long lake. From far away its rumble was heard. The forest shook and fell, all the forces of destruction let loose. The conflagration blazed, the rapids raged, the wild animals prowled hungrily around the farms. Under the hooves of the eight-legged horses, all quiet contentment was trampled into dust. Wasn't that one of the, you know, back at Heimdall, the farm where all of the Nordic gods were living or something. There was a mythical horse called Sleipnir. I think he had eight legs. Under the hooves of the eight-legged horses, all quiet contentment was trampled into dust. Wherever the chase surged past, there the hearts of men flared up in wildness, and the women had to flee from their homes in blanched terror. And we young ones sat marveling, silent, ill at ease, and yet blissful. Such people, we thought, we will never see their like. Didn't the people of that time ever think about what they were doing? We asked. Of course they thought, children, the old people would answer. But not like we think, we persisted. And then the old people did not understand what we meant. But we were thinking, in the particular spirit of self-observation, which had already made its way inside of us. We were thinking about him with the eyes of ice and the long crooked fingers, he who sits in the soul's darkest corner and tears apart our being the way old women pick apart scraps of silk and wool. Bit by bit, the long, hard, crooked fingers had plucked until our entire self was lying there like a heap of rags. And thus our best feelings, our most original thoughts, everything we had done and said, had been examined, cross-examined, picked apart, and the eyes of ice had been watching, and the toothless mouth had smiled scornfully and whispered, "See, it's rags, only rags." There was one of the people of that time, too, who had opened her soul to the spirit with the eyes of ice. He sat by one of them, keeping watch at the source of action, smiling scornfully at evil and good, fathoming everything, judging nothing, investigating, searching, picking apart, paralyzing the movements of the heart and the force of thought by smiling scornfully without return. The lovely Marianne carried the spirit of self-observation within her. She felt his eyes of ice and scornful smile follow every step, every word. Her life was turned into a play where she was the only spectator. She was no longer a person. She did not suffer. She did not rejoice. She did not love. She performed the role of the lovely Marianne Sinclair, and self-observation sat with staring eyes of ice and diligent, disassembling fingers, and watched her perform. She was divided into two halves. Pale, unsympathetic, and scornful, one half of herself sat and watched how the other half acted, and never did the peculiar spirit that picked apart her behaving And never did the peculiar spirit that picked apart her behaving have a word of feeling or sympathy. Oof, that's cold. But where then had he been, the pale watcher at the source of action, that night when she learned to feel the fullness of life? Where was he when she, the sensible Marianne, kissed Gösta Berling before 100 pairs of eyes, and when in anger she threw herself down into the snowdrift to die? Then the eyes of ice were blinded, then the scornful smile was paralyzed, for passion had stormed forth through her soul. The roar of the wild pursuit of adventure had thundered in her ears. She had been a whole person for this one terrible night. O you god of self-mockery, when Marianne with endless effort managed to lift her rigid arms and throw them around Gösta's neck, then, like old Behrenkreuz, you had to turn your eyes away from the earth and look at the stars. During that night you had no power. You were dead. While she composed her hymns of love, dead. While she hurried down to Fur after the major, dead when she saw the flames coloring the sky red above the treetops. Look, they had come. Excuse me. Little watermelon I ate. Look, they had come, the powerful storm birds, the griffins of demonic passions. With wings of fire and claws of steel, they came rushing down upon you. You spirit with eyes of ice, they sank their claws into your neck and flung you away into the unknown. You were dead and crushed. But now they have rushed on, those proud, those mighty birds, whose path knows no calculation, and no observer had followed. And out of the depths of the unknown, the strange spirit of self-observation was resurrected, and had once again settled down in the soul of the lovely Marianne. For the entire month of February, Marianne lay ill at Ekeby. When she sought out the major at Frö, she had been infected with smallpox. With all its violence, this horrible disease had thrown itself upon her, who was terribly sickened and exhausted. She had been near death, but toward the end of the month she was, however, restored. She was still weak and very disfigured. She would never again be called the lovely Marianne. This, however, was not yet known by anyone other than Marianne and her nurse. Even the cavaliers did not yet know it. The sick room where the smallpox raged was not open to everyone. But when is the power of self-observation greater than during the long hours of recovery? Then it sits and stares with its eyes of ice and picks with its knotted hard fingers. And if you look carefully, behind it sits an even paler being, who stares and paralyzes and smiles scornfully, and behind that another and another, smiling scornfully at one another and at the whole world. And while Marianne was looking at herself with all those staring eyes of ice, all original feelings inside of her died. She was lying there pretending to be sick. She was lying there pretending to be unhappy, pretending to be in love, pretending to be vengeful. She was all of that, and yet it was only pretend. Everything turned to pretense and unreality under the eyes of ice that were watching her, while they in turn were watched by a pair behind them, who were watched by another pair in an infinite perspective. All of life's strong forces were slumbering. She had power for fervent hatred and devoted love for a single night, not more. She did not even know if she loved Gösta Berling. She longed to see him to test whether he could move her outside of herself. While the reign of illness lasted, she had only one lucid thought. She had to take care that her illness would not become known. She did not want to see her parents. She did not want reconciliation with her father. And she knew that he would change his mind if he was allowed to see how sick she was. Therefore, she ordered that her parents and everyone else besides should be told that the troublesome eye disease that always came over her when she visited her home parish forced her to remain indoors behind drawn curtains. She forbade her nurse from saying how sick she was. forbade the cavaliers from fetching a doctor from Karlstad. She had smallpox, to be sure, but only a mild case. There were medicines enough in the cabinet at Ekeby to save her life. She never thought about dying. She was simply waiting for a day of health, to be able to go to the minister with Gösta and request to have the banns published. But now the sickness and fever were gone. She was again cold and sensible. To her, it was as though she alone was wise in this world of madmen. She neither hated nor loved. She understood her father. She understood them all. Anyone who understands does not hate. She had found out that Melchior Sinclair intended to have an auction at Björne and be rid of all of his possessions, so that she might not inherit anything after him. It was said that he would make the devastation as thorough as possible. Ooh. First he would sell furniture and household utensils, then the livestock and implements, and finally the farm itself. And he would put all the money in a sack and sink it into the depths of Lake Löven. Her inheritance would be embezzlement, confusion, and devastation. Marianne smiled with approval when she heard this. Such was his character. So must he act. It seemed strange to her that she had composed the great hymn of love. Like others, she had dreamed of a charcoal burner's hut. Now it seemed peculiar to her that she had ever had a dream. She sighed for nature. She was tired of this constant play acting. She never had a strong feeling. She scarcely grieved for her beauty, but she shuddered at the pity of strangers. Oh, one moment of forgetfulness of herself, a gesture, a word, an action that was not calculated. One day, when the contagion has been cleared from the rooms and she was dressed, lying on a sofa, she had Gösta Berling summoned. The reply came that he had gone to the auction at Björne. It was in truth a great auction at Björne. It was an old, wealthy home. People had come a long way to attend the sale. The great Melchior Sinclair had thrown together all the property of the household into the large drawing room. There were thousands of objects, assembled in piles that reached from the floor to the ceiling. He himself had gone round the house like an angel of destruction on Judgment Day, throwing together what he wanted to sell. Things belonging to the kitchen, the black kettles, wooden chairs, pewter tankards, copper pans. All this was left in peace by him, for there was nothing about them that reminded him of Marianne. But this was also the only thing that escaped his wrath. He broke into Marianne's room, devastating everything. Her dollhouse was there, and her bookshelf, the little chair he had made for her, her trinkets and clothes, her bench and bed. All of that must go. And then he went from room to room. He snatched up everything he found displeasing and carried large loads down to the auction room. He panted under the weight of sofas and marble tops, but he persevered. And he tossed it all together in frightful confusion. He threw open the sideboards and took out the magnificent family silver. Away with it! Marianne had touched it. He filled his arms with snow-white damask and smooth linen tablecloths, with hand's breadth hem stitching. Smooth linen tablecloths with embroidery as wide as a hand on the hems, the stitched hems. Honorably handcrafted work, the fruits of many years of labor, and threw it all down on the piles. Away with it! Marianne was not worthy of owning it. He stormed through the rooms with piles of porcelain, hardly being careful not to break plates by the dozen. He seized the genuine cups on which the family coat of arms was branded. Away with them! May whoever wants to use them. He threw down mountains of bed linens from the attic, bolsters and pillows so soft that you sank down into them, as if into a wave. Away with them. Marianne had slept in them. He threw indignant glances at the old familiar furniture. Was there a chair that she hadn't sat on once? Or a sofa that she hadn't used? Or a picture that she hadn't looked at? A chandelier that had not illuminated her? A mirror that had not reproduced her features? Gloomily, he clenched his fists against this world of memories. He would have gladly rushed at them, swinging a club, and crushed them into tiny bits and pieces. Yet it seemed to be an even more brilliant revenge to have an auction of all this. It would all go to strangers, off to be soiled in crofters' cottages, to decay under the care of indifferent strangers. Did he not know the chipped auction furniture in farm cottages, fallen into disrepute like his lovely daughter? Away with them! May they stand with torn open stuffing and worn off gilding, with broken legs and stained surfaces, and long for their former home. Away with them to all the corners of the sky, so that no one may find them, no hand collect them. When the auction began, he had filled half the room with an unbelievable muddle of piled up household utensils. On the other side of the room he had set up a long counter. Behind it stood the auctioneer, making outcries. The scriveners sat there making notes, and Melchior Sinclair had a cask of liquor standing there. In the other half of the room, in the entryway and in the yard, were the buyers. There were lots of people, much noise and merriment. Purchases were steady and the auction lively, but at the cask of liquor, with all his property in enormous confusion behind him, sat Melchior Sinclair, half drunk and half crazy. His hair rose in wiry tufts over his red face. His eyes were rolling, bitter and bloodshot. He shouted and laughed as if he had been in the best of spirits, and he called anyone who made a good offer over to him and offered him a drink. Also among those who saw him there was Gösta Berling, who had slipped in among the crowd of buyers, but avoided coming before the eyes of Melchior Sinclair. He became thoughtful at that sight, and his heart felt a premonition of misfortune. He wondered where Marianne's mother might be during all this, and now he went, intractable in his will, but driven forward by fate, to seek out Mrs. Gustava Sinclair. He had to pass through many doors before he found her. The great iron magnate had a short temper and little patience for lamentation and women's complaining. He had tired of seeing her tears flow at the fate that had befallen the treasure of her home. He became furious that she could weep for linen and bedsheets, when what was more important was that his lovely daughter herself was lost. And so with clenched fists he had chased her ahead of him through the house, out into the kitchen, all the way into the pantry. Farther than that she could not escape, and he had been content to see her there, crouched down behind the stairs, awaiting hard blows, perhaps death. He let her remain there, but he locked the door and put the key in his pocket. She could sit there then, while the auction was going on. She didn't have to starve, and his ear was in peace from her lamentation. Such hard people. There she sat, still imprisoned in her own pantry, when Gösta came walking through the corridor between the kitchen and the drawing room. There he saw Mrs. Gustava's face in a small window that sat high up on the wall. She had climbed up on the stair-step and was looking out of her prison. "What are you doing up there, Aunt Gustava?" asked Gösta. "He shut me in," she whispered. "The mill owner?" "Yes. I thought he was going to kill me. But listen, Gösta, take the key to the drawing-room door and go into the kitchen and unlock the pantry door with it. Then I'll come out. That key goes here." Gösta obeyed, and in a few minutes the small woman was standing out in the kitchen, which was completely empty. "You should have let one of the maids open up with the drawing-room key," said Gösta. "Do you think I want to teach them that trick? Then I would never again have anything left alone in the pantry, and besides, I took the opportunity to clean on the topmost shelves. They needed it, you know. I don't understand how I could have let them get so full of rubbish." "You have a lot to take care of, Aunt," said Gösta apologetically. "Yes, you can say that. If I'm not everywhere, then neither spinning wheel nor loom is going at the right speed. And if—" Here she stopped and dried a corner of her eyes. "God help me the way I'm talking," she said. "I likely won't have anything to look after anymore. Not me. He's selling off all that we have. Wasn't that a fun little turn of the words. If I'm not everywhere, then neither spinning wheel nor loom is going at the right speed. Okay. Uh, I likely won't have anything to look at after anymore, she said. He's selling off all that we have. Yes, that is a misery, said Gösta. You know that big mirror in the drawing room, Gösta? It was so remarkable, for the glass in it was whole, and there was nothing wrong with the gilding. I got it from my mother, and now he wants to sell it. He's crazy. You can say that. I guess he's no better than that. He won't stop before we have to go and beg on the highway, like the Majoress. It won't go that far anyway, answered Gösta. Yes, Gösta. When the Majoress went away from Ekeby, she prophesied misfortune for us, and now it's coming. She would not have let it happen that he would sell Björne. And just think, his own porcelain, the genuine cups from his own home, are to be sold. The Majoress would never have allowed it. But what is going on with him? Asked Gösta. Oh, it's just that Marianne hasn't come back. He has been waiting and waiting here. He has walked up and down the lane for days on end, waiting for her. He is longing himself crazy, but I don't dare say anything, not me. Marianne believes that he is angry with her. Listen, Hugh, she doesn't believe that. She knows him well enough, but she is proud and won't take the first step. They're rigid and hard, the both of them, and they have nothing to complain about. I'm the one who's stuck in the middle. You do know, don't you, that Marianne is going to marry me? Oh, Gösta, she'll never do that. She says that just to annoy him. She is too spoiled to marry a poor man, and too proud as well. Go on home and tell her that if she doesn't come soon, all of her inheritance will go to waste. Oh, he's probably throwing away everything without getting anything for it. Gösta became downright angry with her. There she sat at a large kitchen table and did not have the heart for anything other than her mirrors and her porcelain. You ought to be ashamed, Aunt, he burst out. There you throw your daughter out into the snowdrift, and then you think that it is only spitefulness on her part not to come back. And you think she is no better than that she would abandon the one she cares for just because she would otherwise lose her inheritance. Dear Gösta, don't be angry, not you too. I don't even know what I'm saying. I tried everything to open the door for Marianne, but he took me and dragged me away. They're always saying here at home that I don't understand anything. I won't begrudge you Marianne, Gösta, if you can make her happy. It isn't so easy to make a woman happy, Gösta. Gösta looked at her. How could he have raised his voice in wrath against a person such as her? She was frightened and persecuted, but with such a good heart. You haven't asked me how Marianne is doing, he said slowly. She burst into tears. Won't you get angry if I ask you? She said. I've been longing to ask the whole time. Think, I don't know any more about her, other than that she's alive. Not a greeting have I had from her the whole time, not even when I sent clothes to her. And then I thought that you and her didn't want me to know anything about her. Gösta could not stand it any more. He was wild, he was dizzy. At times God must send his wolves after him to force him into obedience. But the tears of the old woman's complaints were harder for him to endure than the howling of wolves. He let her know the truth. Marianne has been sick the whole time, he said. She has had smallpox. She was supposed to get up today and lie on the sofa. I haven't seen her since that first night. Mrs. Gustava rose to the floor with a leap. She let Gösta stand there, rushing without a word into her husband. She let Gösta stand there, rushing without a word into her husband. The people in the auction room saw her coming up to him and excitedly whisper something in his ear. They saw how his face became even redder, and his hand, resting on the tap, twisted it around so that the liquor streamed out onto the floor. It struck all of them that if Mrs. Gustava had come with such important news, the auction would immediately end. The auctioneer's gavel did not strike, the scrivener's pens halted, and no new offers were heard. Melchior Sinclair emerged from his thoughts. "Well," he shouted, "what about it?" And the auction was in full swing again. Gösta remained sitting in the kitchen, and Mrs. Gustava came weeping out to him. "It didn't help," she said. "I thought he would stop if he heard that Marianne had been sick. But he's letting it go on. I know he wants to, but now he's ashamed." Gösta shrugged his shoulders and said farewell to her without further ado. In the entryway, he encountered Sintram. "Such damn fun entertainment!" exclaimed Sintram, rubbing his hands together. "You're a master, Gösta. You are. Heavens, what a mess you've been able to make." "It will get more fun in a while," whispered Gösta. "The Broby minister is here with a sleigh full of money. They're saying that he wants to buy all of Björne and pay cash. Then I'll be wanting to see the great mill owner, Uncle Sintram." Sintram drew his head down between his shoulders and laughed to himself for a long time. But then he was off to the auction room and all the way over to Melchior Sinclair. "If you want a drink, Sintram, then you've got to God. If you want a drink, Sintram, then you've got to God help me make a bid first." Sintram came all the way up to him. "You're lucky now as always, brother," he said. "There's a big man come to the farm with a sleigh full of money. He's buying Björne and all the inside and outside inventory. He's talked to a good many to buy up things for him. It seems he doesn't want to be seen here too long." He's talked to a good many to buy up things for him. That minister from Broby, he's got something. He's got some business here. "You can surely say who he is, brother. Then I'll surely offer you a drink for the trouble." Sintram took the drink and 2 steps back before he replied, "It seems to be the Broby minister, brother Melchior." Melchior Sinclair had many better friends than the Broby minister. There had been a feud going on between them for years. There were stories going around about how the great mill owner would lie in wait on dark nights on roads where the minister might pass, and how he had given him many an honorable thrashing. That fawner and tormentor of farmers. There's no love lost for the ministers in Värmland, I can tell you that. Well, it was well that Sintram had taken a few steps backward. However, he did not completely escape the great man's wrath. He got a liquor glass between the eyes and the whole cask of liquor at his feet. But then came a scene that gave his heart joy for a long time. "Does the Broby minister want my farm?" roared Squire Sinclair. "Are you here buying things for the Broby minister? Oh, you ought to be ashamed. You ought to learn some manners." He got hold of a candlestick and an inkhorn and threw them out among the throng of people. It was all the bitterness of his poor heart that could finally be vented. Roaring like a wild animal, he clenched his fists at those standing around and threw whatever missiles he had at them. Liquor glasses and bottles flew across the room. He was beside himself in his wrath. "This is the end of the auction," he roared. "Out with you! Never in my day shall the Broby minister have Björne. Out with you! I'll teach you, I will, to buy for the Broby minister." He let loose on the auctioneer and the scriveners. They rushed away. In their confusion, they turned over the counter, and the mill owner broke into the throng of peaceful people with indescribable fury. There was flight and wild confusion. A few hundred people crowded toward the door, fleeing from one single man, and he stood still, roaring his "Out with you!" He sent curses after them, now and then sweeping at the piles with a chair that he swung like a club. He pursued them out into the entryway, but no further. When the last outsider had left the stairs, he went back into the drawing room, locking the door behind him. Then he pulled together a mattress and a few pillows, lay down on them, fell asleep in the midst of all the destruction, and did not awaken again until the next day. When Gösta got home, He found out that Marianne wanted to speak with him. That was a good coincidence. He had just been wondering how he would talk things over with her. As he came into the murky room where she was lying, he had to stop a moment by the door. He did not see where she was. "Stay where you are, Gösta," Marianne said to him. "It may be dangerous to come close to me." But Gösta had come, taking the stairs 2 steps at a time, quivering with eagerness and longing. What did he care about contagion? He wanted to enjoy the blessedness of seeing her. For she was beautiful, his beloved. No one had such soft hair, such a clear, radiant forehead. Her entire face was a play of beautifully contoured lines. He thought of her eyebrows, clearly and sharply outlined, like the honey guide on a lily, and of the bold curve of her nose and of her lips, softly contoured, like rolling waves, and of the elongated oval of her cheek, and the exquisitely fine form of her chin. And he thought of the pale rose color of her skin, of the enchanting impression of her coal black eyebrows under the light hair, of the blue eyes swimming in clear white, and of the glimmer of light in the corners of her eyes. She was splendid, his beloved. He thought about what a warm heart she concealed under her proud exterior. She had energy for devotion and sacrifice concealed under her fine skin and proud words. It was blessedness to see her. In 2 leaps he had stormed up the stairs, and she thought that he would stay over by the door. He stormed through the room and fell to his knees by her pillow. But his intention was to see her, kiss her, and bid her farewell. He loved her. He would no doubt never stop loving her, but his heart was accustomed to being trampled. Oh, where would he find her, this rose without support and roots that he could take up and call his own? Not even her, whom he had found cast out and half dead by the roadside, would he be able to hold on to. Not even her, whom he had found cast out and half dead by the roadside, would he be able to hold on to. When would his love raise its song so loud and clear that no discord cut through it? When would his castle of happiness be built on a foundation that no other heart longed for in worry and loss? He thought about how he would say farewell to her. "There is great lamentation in your home," he would say. "My heart is torn apart at the thought of it. You must go home and give your father back his reason. Your mother lives in constant mortal danger. You must go home, my love." See, such words of self-denial he had on his lips, but they remained unsaid. He fell to his knees at her pillow, and he took her head between his hands and kissed her. But then he found no words. His heart started to pound violently, as if it would burst in his chest. The smallpox had ravaged her fair face. Her skin had become rough and pockmarked. Never more would the red blood shimmer forth on her cheeks, or the fine blue veins be seen on her temples. Her eyes were flat under swollen eyelids. Her eyebrows had fallen off, and the enamel gleam of the whiteness of her eyes was broken in yellow. All was devastated. The bold lines were changed to rough and heavy ones. There were more than a few who later grieved for Marianne Sinclair's past fairness. All over Värmland, people complained of the loss of her light skin. Her flashing eyes and blonde hair, beauty was esteemed there like nowhere else. These happy people grieved, as if the land had lost a jewel in the crown of its honor, as if the sunlit radiance of its existence had been stained. But the first man who saw her after she had lost her beauty did not abandon himself to sorrow. Inexpressible feelings filled his soul. The longer he looked at her, the warmer he felt inside. Love grew and grew like a river in spring. In waves of fire it poured forth from his heart. It filled all of his being. It climbed up into his eyes as tears, sighed on his lips, trembled in his hands, in his whole body. Oh, to love her, to defend her, to keep her from harm, free from harm, to be her slave and her guardian spirit. Love is strong when it has received the fiery baptism of pain. He could not speak with Marianne about separation and self-denial. He could not leave her. He owed her his life. He could commit mortal sins for her sake. He did not speak one reasonable word. He only wept and kissed, up until the time when the old nurse found it was time to lead him out. When he was gone, Marianne lay thinking about him and his agitation. It is good to be so loved, she thought. Yes, it was good to be loved, but how about herself? What did she feel? Oh, nothing, less than nothing. Was it dead, her love? Or where had it gone? Where was it hiding, child of her heart? Was it still alive? Had it crept into the darkest corner? Had it crept into the darkest corner of her heart and sat there, freezing under the eyes of ice, frightened by the pale, scornful laughter, half smothered under the knotty fingers? Oh, my love, she sighed, child of my heart, do you live, or are you dead? Dead like my beauty. The next day, the great mill owner went to see his wife early. See to it that there's order in the house again, Gustava, he said. I'm going to bring Marianne home. Yes, dear Melchior, there will surely be order here again, she replied. With that, everything was clear between them. 1 hour later, the great iron magnate was on his way to Ekeby. There was no nobler, more benevolent old gentleman than the mill owner, as he sat in the sleigh with its cover lowered, in his best fur and his best sash. Now his hair was combed flat over his head, his face was pale, and his eyes had sunk down into their sockets. And there was no limit to the brilliance that streamed down from the sky over the February day. The snow glistened like the eyes of young girls when the first waltz begins. The birches stretched their fine lacework of thin brown red twigs toward the sky, and on some of them sat a fringe of small glittering icicles. There was brilliance and festive shimmer over the day. The horses threw their forelegs up as if in a dance, and the coachman had to crack the whip in pure joy. After a short journey, the great mill owner's sleigh stopped outside the large stairway at Ekeby. The servant came out. Where are the masters? Asked the mill owner. They are hunting the great bear at Gerlita Bluff. All of them? All of them, squire. Those who don't go along because of the bear, at least go along because of the lunch basket. The iron magnate laughed so that it echoed across the silent yard. He gave the servant $1 for his reply. You know, the Swedish money was called dollar, D-A-L-E-R. Maybe they came from the valley. That's like the valley money, right? They say the origin of the English word dollar is this old Scandinavian money that came from the valley. Maybe they had a mine in the valley that was mining silver and copper and stuff. The Swedes were known for their mines. So $1 coin would have been spread throughout Europe. All right, now say to that daughter of mine that I am here to get her. She doesn't need to freeze. I have a covered sleigh and a wolfskin to wrap her in. Would you care to step in, squire? Thank you. I'm fine where I am. The fellow disappeared, and the mill owner began his wait. He was in such a marvelous mood that day that nothing could annoy him. He had probably thought that he would have to wait a little for Marianne. Perhaps she wasn't even up yet. For the time being, he had to amuse himself by looking around. On the cornice hung a long icicle that the sunshine was having dreadful trouble with. It began on top, melting a drop loose, and then wanting it to fall to the ground along the icicle. But before it got halfway, it was frozen again, and the sunshine continued making fresh attempts, still without success. But finally there was a freebooter of a sunbeam that clung tight to the tip of the icicle, a little one that shone and sparkled with eagerness, and sure enough, it reached its goal. A drop fell resoundingly to the ground. The mill owner watched and laughed. You didn't do too bad, you. he said to the sunbeam. The yard was silent and deserted. Not a sound was heard in the great house, but the iron magnate did not get impatient. He knew that women needed a lot of time before they were ready. He sat and watched the dovecote. The birds had a grate in front of the opening. They were enclosed as long as winter lasted, so that the hawk would not wipe them out. Now and then a dove came and stuck its white head out from between the bars. She's waiting for spring, said Melchior Sinclair, but she has to be patient for the time being. The dove came so regularly that he took out his watch and observed her with watch in hand. Exactly every 3 minutes she stuck out her head. No, my little friend, he said, do you think spring will be ready in 3 minutes? She'll have to learn to wait. And he himself had to wait. But he had plenty of time. At first the horses scraped impatiently in the snow, but then they got sleepy from standing and blinking in the sunlight. The horses leaned their heads together and slept. The coachman sat straight on the stand with whip and reins in hand, and his face turned directly toward the sun, and he slept, so that he snored. But the mill owner did not sleep. He had never been less inclined to sleep. He had seldom had more enjoyable hours than during this happy wait. But Marianne had been sick. She had not been able to come before, but now she would come. Oh, of course she would, and everything would be fine again. Now she really would understand that he was not angry with her. He had come personally, with 2 horses and a covered sleigh. Over by the entrance to the beehive sat a titmouse, occupied with a really devilish trick. He would have his dinner, of course, and sure enough, he was knocking on the entrance to the beehive with his sharp little beak. But inside the hive, the bees were hanging in a large, dark sack. Everything is in the strictest order. The stewards dole out the food rations. The cupbearer runs from mouth to mouth with nectar and ambrosia. The ones that are hanging farthest in change places with the ones outside at a steady crawl, so that heat and comfort might be evenly divided. Frightful order in that beehive. Then they hear the knocking of the titmouse, and the whole hive buzzes with curiosity. Is it friend or enemy? Is it a danger to the community? The queen has a bad conscience. She cannot wait in peace and quiet. Do you think it is the murdered drone's phantoms that are haunting out there? Go out and see what it is, she orders her sister, the doorkeeper, and this is done. With a long live the queen, she rushes out, and hi, the titmouse is over her. With neck extended and wings shaking with excitement, he seizes her, crushes her, eats her, and no one carries the news of her fate into the queen. But the titmouse starts knocking again, and the queen bee continues to send out her doorkeepers, and all of them disappear. No one comes back to tell who has knocked. Oh, it is getting dreadful inside of the dark hive. Vengeful spirits are pursuing their game outside. If only one lacked ears. If only one could refrain from being curious. If only one could wait in peace. The great Melchior Sinclair laughed so that he had tears in his eyes at the stupid womenfolk inside the hive and at the clever yellow-green rogue outside. There's no trick to waiting when you are completely sure of your business and when there is plenty to divert your thoughts with. Then there comes the big farm dog. He sneaks up on the very tips of his paws, keeping his eyes on the ground and wagging his tail. Then there comes the big farm dog. He sneaks up on the very tips of his paws, keeping his eyes on the ground and wagging his tail a little, as if he intended to be off on the most indifferent errand. Suddenly he starts to eagerly dig in the snow. No doubt the old scoundrel has concealed ill-gotten goods there. But just as the old farm dog is lifting his head to see whether he can now eat in peace, he becomes quite disappointed by seeing 2 jays in front of him. Thief, say the jays, looking like conscience itself. "We are police officers. Over here with the stolen goods." "Oh, hush, you rascals. I'm the farm sheriff." "Just the right one," they mock. The dog throws himself over them, and they flee with languid wing strokes. The dog rushes after them, jumping and barking. But while he is chasing the one, the other is already back. She flies down into the hole, tearing at the piece of meat, but doesn't manage to lift it. The dog jerks the meat to himself, holding it between his paws and biting into it. The jays sit down right in front of him and say mean things. He glares sternly at them while he eats, and when things get much too crazy, he rushes up and drives them away. The sun started to sink down against the western hills. The great mill owner looked at his watch. It was 3 o'clock, and Mother, who had had dinner ready at 12. Just then the servant came out and reported that Miss Marianne wished to speak with him. The mill owner placed the wolfskin over his arm and went up the steps in a marvelous mood. When Marianne heard his heavy steps coming up the stairs, she did not yet know whether she would go home with him or not. She only knew that she must have an end to this long waiting. She had hoped that the cavaliers would come home, but they did not. They were out bear hunting. She had hoped that they would come home so she herself had to see. I messed that one up. Marianne had hoped that the cavaliers would come home, but they did not. So she herself had to see that all of this world would come to an end. She couldn't hold out any longer. She had thought that he would go his way in anger when he had waited for 5 minutes, or that he would break down the doors, or try to set fire to the house. But there he sat, calm and smiling, and only waited. She harbored neither hatred nor love for him. But there was an inner voice in her that warned her, as it were, about once again placing herself in his power. And besides, she wanted to keep her word to Gösta. If he had fallen asleep, if he had spoken, if he had been worried, if he had shown any sign of hesitation, if he had the wagon driven away in the shadows. But he was simply patience and certainty. Certain, so contagiously certain that she would come, if only he waited. Her head hurt. Every nerve twitched. She could not find peace as long as she knew that he was sitting there. It was as if his will carried her bound down the stairs. So she would at least speak with him. Before he came, she had the curtain drawn up, and she arranged herself so that her face came into full daylight. In that way, she no doubt intended to set him to a type of test. But Melchior Sinclair was a remarkable man that day. When he saw her, he did not make a gesture. He did not let out a cry. It was as if he had not seen any change in her. She knew how highly he had adored her fair appearance, but he did not show any sign of sorrow. He mastered his whole being so as not to distress her. This touched her. She began to understand why her mother still held him dear. He showed no hesitation. He came neither with reproaches nor excuses. "I will wrap the wolfskin around you, Marianne. It's not cold. It's been on my lap the whole time." In any case, he went over to the fire and warmed it. Then he helped her get up from the sofa, wrapped the fur around her, hung a shawl over her head, pulled it down under her arms, and tied it on her back. She let it happen. She was without a will of her own. It was good to be sheltered. It was sweet not to need to decide. Above all good for anyone who was as picked apart as her. Above all, good for anyone who was as picked apart as her, for anyone who did not own a thought or a feeling that was her own. The great mill owner lifted her up, carried her down to the sleigh, drew up the cover, tucked the blankets around her, and drove away from Akeby. She closed her eyes and sighed, partly in pleasure, partly in loss. She was leaving life, real life, But then that might as well be the same to her. She could not live, only pretend. Luckily, I have a little bottle of water here to wet the whistle. A few days later, her mother arranged it so that she happened to encounter Gösta. She sent for him while the mill owner was taking a long walk up to the log drivers and led him in to Marianne. Gösta came in, but he neither greeted her nor spoke. He remained standing over by the door and looked at the ground like an obstinate boy. But Gösta, exclaimed Marianne. She was sitting in her armchair and looked at him half amused. Yes, that's my name. Come here. Come all the way up to me, Gösta. He went slowly up to her, without raising his eyes. Come closer. Get on your knees here. Good Lord, what good will all this do? He exclaimed. But he obeyed. Gösta, I want to tell you that I think it was best that I came back home. Let's hope they won't throw Miss Marianne out into the snowdrifts any more. Oh, Gösta, don't you like me any more? Do you think I'm too ugly? He pulled down her head and kissed her, but he appeared equally cold. She was actually amused. If it pleased him to be jealous of her parents, what of it? It would soon pass. Now it amused her to try to win him back. She scarcely knew why she wanted to keep him there, but she wanted to. She was reminded that he had nonetheless succeeded in freeing her from herself, if only for the once. He was probably the only man who would be able to do so yet again. And now she began to talk, eager to win him back. She said that it had not been her intention to abandon him forever, but for the sake of appearances they must break off their connection for a while. He himself could see that her father stood on the threshold of madness, that her mother was in constant mortal danger. He must understand that she had been forced to go home. Then his anger burst out in words. She didn't need to put on airs. He didn't want to be her plaything any longer. She had abandoned him as soon as she had been able to go home, and he could not love her any more. When he came home from the hunt the day before yesterday and found her gone without a greeting, without a word, then his blood had frozen in his veins. He had been close to dying from sorrow. He could not love the one who had caused him so much pain. And besides, she had never loved him. She was a coquette who wanted to have someone who kissed and caressed her here in the home parish too. That was all. So did he think that she was accustomed to letting bachelors caress her? Oh well, he probably believed that. Women were not as holy as they appeared. Selfishness and coquetry from the beginning to end. No, if she had known how he felt when he came home from the hunt, it was as if he had waded in ice water. He would never overcome that pain. It would follow him throughout the rest of his life. He could never again be human. She tried to explain to him how it had all happened. She tried to remind him that she had always been faithful. Yes, it was all the same, for now he no longer loved her. Now he had seen through her. She was selfish. She did not love him. She had gone without even saying goodbye. Over and over again he came back to this. She was almost enjoying the scene. She could not get angry. She understood his anger so well. She did not fear any real breakup either. Finally, though, she became worried. Had there been such a change in him that he could no longer love her? Gösta, she said, was I selfish when I went to her after the major? I did remember that they had smallpox there. It isn't good to go out in thin shoes in the cold and snow either. Love lives from love, and not from services and good deeds, said Gösta. So you want us to be strangers from here on, Gösta? That's what I want. Gösta Berling is very changeable. I'm usually accused of that. He was cold, impossible to thaw, and in reality she herself was even colder. Self-observation sat and smiled scornfully at her attempts to pretend to be in love. Gösta, she said, as she made yet another effort, I have never consciously wronged you, even if it might appear so. I beg you, forgive me. I cannot forgive you. She knew that if she possessed a genuine emotion, she would have won him back, and she tried to pretend to be impassioned. The eyes of ice mocked her, but still she tried. She did not want to lose him. Don't go, Gösta. Don't leave angry. Think of how ugly I've become. No one can love me again. I don't either, he said. You'll have to get used to seeing your heart trampled on, like other people. Gösta, I have never been able to love anyone but you. Forgive me. Don't abandon me. You are the only man who can save me from myself. He pushed her away from him. You don't speak the truth, he said with icy calm. I don't know what you want from me, but I see that you're lying. Why do you want to hang on to me? You're so rich that you should never lack for suitors. And with that, he left. And as soon as he had shut the door, loss and pain in all of its majesty made its entry into Marianne's heart. It was love, child of her own heart, that came out of its corner, where the eyes of ice had banished him. He came, the longed-for one, now when it was too late. Now he stepped forth, serious and almighty, and loss and pain held up his royal mantle. When Marianne could not... When Marianne could with real certainty say to herself that Gösta Berling had abandoned her, she experienced a purely physical pain so terrible that she was almost knocked unconscious. She pressed her hands against her heart and sat for hours in the same place, struggling with tearless sorrow. And it was she herself who suffered, not a stranger, not an actress. It was she herself. Why had her father come and separated them? Her love had not been dead. It was simply in her state of weakness after the illness that she had not been able to experience its power. O God, that she had lost him. O God, that she had awakened so late. Ah, he was the only man. He was the conqueror of her heart. She could not take anything from him. Hardness and angry words from him simply inclined her to humble love. If he had struck her, she would have crept over to him like a dog and kissed his hand. She seized pen and paper and wrote with terrible ardor. First she wrote about love and loss. Then she pleaded, not for his love, only for his mercy. It was a kind of verse that she wrote. She did not know what she should do to get some relief for this dull pain. When she had finished, she thought that if he were to see this, he might still believe that she loved him. Well, why shouldn't she send what she had written to him? The next day she would send it, and she no doubt believed that it would lead him back to her. The next day she was anxious and in conflict with herself. What she had written appeared so pitiful and stupid to her. It had neither rhyme nor meter. It was only prose. He would only laugh at such verses, wouldn't he? Her pride also awakened. If he did not love her any more, then it was a terrible degradation to beg for his love. At times wisdom came to her and said that she ought to be happy that she had escaped from the connection with Gösta and all the miserable conditions that would come with it. The torment of her heart was, however, so awful that at last her feelings had to prevail. 3 days after the day when she had become aware of her love, she had the verses bound and Gösta Berling's name written on the cover. They were not sent, however. Before she had found a suitable messenger, she had heard such things about Gösta Berling that she realized it was already too late to win him back. but it became her lifelong sorrow that she had not sent the verses in time. Well, she could have won him. All her pain bound itself fast on this point. If I had not hesitated so long, if I had not hesitated so many days. These written words, would have won for her the happiness of her life, or at least the reality of life. She was certain that they would have led him back to her. Sorrow, however, came to do her the same service as love. It made her into a whole person, capable of devoting herself to good as well as bad. Seething emotions coursed freely through her soul, without being blocked by the ice cold of self-observation. Then she was also, despite her ugliness, much loved. It is said, however, that she never forgot Gösta Berling. She grieved for him the way you grieve over a wasted life. And her poor verses, which for a time were much read, are long since forgotten. Yet they seem strangely moving, the way I see them written on yellowed paper with washed-out ink and a cramped, neat handwriting. The loss of an entire life is bound up in these poor words, and I write of them with a certain mystic dread, as if secret powers were dwelling in them. I ask you to read them and think about them. Who knows what power they might have had if they had been sent? They are, however, passionate enough to bear witness to a true emotion. Perhaps they would have led him back to her. They are touching enough, tender enough in their awkward formlessness. No one can wish them otherwise. No one will want to see them tied up in the chains of rhyme and meter. And yet it is so melancholy to think that perhaps just this imperfection hindered her from sending them in time. I ask you to read them and love them. It is a person in a state of great distress who has written them. And here they are. Child, you have loved, but never more shall you taste the delights of love. Storms of passion have shaken your soul. Be glad you have now come to rest. No more are you tossed in towering delight. Be glad you have now come to rest. No more to be lowered to painful depths. Oh, never more. Child, you have loved, but never more shall your soul be set on fire. You were like a field of dried up grass, consumed by fire for one brief moment. From billowing smoke clouds and flakes of ash, the birds of the heavens fled howling in fear. May they return home. You will burn no more, can no longer burn. Child, you have loved, but never more shall you hear the voice of love. The force of your heart, like tired children who are sitting on hard school benches, long to be out in freedom and games, but no one calls to them now. They sit like forgotten outposts. No one calls to them now. Child, the only one is gone, and with him all love and delight in loving. He whom you loved so, as if he had taught you to fly on wings into air, into space. He whom you loved so, as if he had given you the only certain spot in a flooded village. He is gone. He who alone knew how to open the door to your heart. I will ask you for a single thing, you, my beloved. Never place on me the burden of hate. The weakest of all things weak. Is not this a human heart? How would it live under the cutting thought that it would do another, that it would do blah, blah, blah. I'll start that stanza, paragraph. I'll start it again. I will ask for you a single thing, you, my beloved. Never place on me the burden of hate. The weakest of all things weak. Is not this a human heart? How would it live under the cutting thought that it would to another be torment? O my beloved, if you would murder me, acquire no dagger, buy not poison or rope, but let me simply know that you would see me vanish from earth's verdant meadows, from the richness of life, and I will sink into the grave. You gave me the life of life. To me you gave love, and now you take back your gift. Oh, I know it well, but do not exchange it for hate. I still love to live. Oh, remember that. But I know I would die under hatred's burden. Good old Selma Lagerlöf, honest and strong is my opinion of her. That was the end of chapter 9, where, the father tried to sell off the farm. He was so angry that his daughter was going to marry Gösta Berling. So that's all for today. The next chapter will be chapter 10, The Young Countess. That should be a fun story, but it will have to wait for another day. Countess Dona. Yeah. That's all for now. Goodbye.